What's up everybody, Commander Sanctum here, and today we have a brand new deck tech using Fire Lord Zuko. Zuko is a 2/4 human noble ally for red, white, black that has Firebending X, where X is Zuko's power, and whenever you cast a spell from exile, and whenever a permanent you control enters from exile, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Due to how many mechanics Zuko works with, there are quite a few ways to build around him, since his ability works with things like Flicker, Impulse Draw, Theft mechanics, and so on. For this deck tech, we'll be using most of these mechanics, though with a more heavy focus on Impulse Drawing and Theft. Mixing this with cards that benefit from casting spells outside your hand, especially ones that make tokens to really maximize the +1/+1 counters, and we'll have a force to be reckoned with. With that, let's get into the card highlights. One of the best ways to get Zuko's ability to trigger is through Impulse Draw. Not only does this act as a type of card advantage or pseudo card draw, it gives you cards that can be cast from exile, or even lands that you can play from exile. For this we have Reckless Impulse and Ren's Resolve, both cards that are exactly the same, exiling 2 cards from the top of your library that can then be played. Light Up the Stage also does the same thing, just costing 1 more mana naturally, but with the added benefit of instead costing 1 mana less if an opponent lost life that turn. Opera Love Song is another one just like the other 3, though at instant speed and restricting the cards to being played that turn and not until the end of the next turn. Still, it has an alternative mode of pumping up 2 creatures which, when paired with the fact that it can be cast at instant speed, makes it a great alternative impulse draw card. Commune with Lava is also an instant, letting you impulse draw as many cards as you want, barring you have the mana to cast it. The best part of this being an instant is that you can use Zuko's firebending mana for it, meaning if you've already gotten Zuko larger, you can really maximize the number of cards you get with this for basically free. For creature-based cards that can impulse draw for us, we have Kate Sith Fortune Teller, which lets you scry and impulse draw 1, while also potentially pumping up a creature's power by a significant amount, depending on the exiled card. This is especially great given the fact that Zuko's firebending is based on his power, making these 2 creatures quite the combination for mana generation. Arana Heart of the Spider impulse draws whenever a modified creature deals combat damage to a player. Since Zuko is all about putting +1/+1 counters on creatures, which makes them modified, you can potentially impulse draw a ton of cards if you have a large enough army that's able to connect with your opponents. Another way to get Zuko's ability online is via Theft cards. These types of cards are ones that exile a card from your opponent, whether it's their hand, graveyard, or library, and lets you then cast them later. Gonti, Lord of Luxury, is probably the most well-known example of this, letting you exile one of the top 4 cards of an opponent's library to then cast later on. Black Cat Cunning Thief is very similar to Gonti, letting you instead look at 9 cards and exile 2 of them when she enters, giving you more bang for your buck than Gonti does. Intellect Devourer instead exiles a card from each opponent's hand when it enters, rather than their library, but can only be cast as long as the Devourer stays alive. Still, the more cards we can get access to, the better, making the Intellect Devourer a great addition, so long as it isn't immediately killed when played. Next up, we have a trio of enchantments that steal from the top of an opponent's library whenever a specific action occurs. Court of Locthwain and Stolen Strategy both do this at upkeep, with the strategy taking it a step further by exiling a card from each opponent, while the court allows you to cast the exile card for free if you're the monarch. Cunning Rhetoric instead does this whenever you're attacked, potentially netting you more cards in a turn cycle than the court, depending on how many of your opponents attack you. It's also important to note that with these 3 cards, and the previous 3, you can use mana of any color to cast the stolen spells, so even if your opponent's playing a completely different colored deck than you, you'll still be able to cast whatever you get from them, making them solid choices no matter what. These next cards not only steal from your opponent, but even lets you cast the stolen cards for free, making them the most efficient type of theft cards we have access to. Atali Primal Storm is a well-known one in commander circles, making for a devastating creature to see across from you at the table, though admittedly not as bad as his completed version. Chaos Wand lets you specifically steal an instant or sorcery from an opponent. Whether this ends up being beneficial or hurtful, like getting a counter spell or a board wipe when you don't want it, is up in the air, but that's the fun in Chaos, isn't it? Ensnared by the Mara is a card that gives your opponents a choice to not let you steal a card from them, but will do damage to them instead, really a win-win for us in most scenarios. Another mechanic that works well with Zuko is Discover. Since Discover has you exile a card until a certain criteria is met before then casting it for free, it means that the cast will occur while it's exiled, exactly what Zuko cares about. Chimmel the Inner Sun is a rather expensive artifact, but one that both makes your spells uncounterable and lets you discover 5, making it a way to both protect your things and enable Zuko all in one. Since we'll have a bit of a token sub-theme going on in the deck, Caparocti Sunborn is an excellent Discover choice, since we'll likely be able to get his attack's trigger to go off every turn if we have a few spare tokens lying around. Long Range Sensor really benefits from attacking each opponent every turn, but again, thanks to the token sub-theme, this shouldn't be too difficult to do. Maximizing the number of charge counters we get on the sensor each turn will go a very long way in really maximizing our Zuko triggers to extreme proportions. Cascade is another mechanic that I wanted to highlight that pairs very well with Zuko, since it works basically like Discover does, just based on the spell's mana value and not an arbitrary number. Call Forth the Tempest is great in that it cascades twice, doubling the Zuko triggers, while also likely wiping your opponent's boards and leaving yours intact. Though that does depend on what you actually get from the Cascade triggers, however. Wild Magic Sorcerer doesn't itself have Cascade, but is an absolutely phenomenal Cascade engine, especially given the whole theme of casting from exile that this deck has. The best part is that the trigger is each turn, not just your turn, meaning if you can cast an instant speed card that, say, was impulse drawn or stolen from an opponent's deck on someone else's turn, it'll get Cascade, getting double the effect for Zuko. While Zuko himself is a payoff for casting all these spells from exile, why not include some more? There are actually a number of cards that generate tokens for us whenever we cast a spell from exile, or elsewhere, really synergizing well with Zuko's ability in all aspects. Iraxa, Empress of Mars will give us a 2/2 creature whenever a spell is cast from anywhere other than our hand, while Pia Nalaar, Consul of Revival, makes a 1/1 Flying Thopter whenever a spell is cast from exile specifically, or whenever a land enters from exile. The fact that Pia Nalaar counts lands entering really benefits us, given the fact that a lot of the impulse draw or theft cards may end up giving us lands, whether we want them to or not. Appa Steadfast Guardian not only works well with the whole theme of casting from exile, thanks to his airbending mechanic, but also gives us a 1/1 creature whenever we cast a spell from exile, synergizing very nicely with pretty much every aspect of the deck. Beyond the token generators, we also have some other cards that give us some sort of benefit whenever we play a card from exile. Passionate Archaeologist and Quintorius Canned both deal damage to opponents whenever we cast a spell from exile, with the Archaeologist dealing damage to a single opponent based on the card's mana value, and Quintorius draining 2 life from each opponent. Heck, Quintorius can even give us a creature token with his +1 ability, or Discover 4 with his -3 ability, really making him a very synergistic choice for the deck. Prosper Tomebound not only impulse draws a card each turn, he also gives us a treasure token whenever we play something from exile, making him both a great engine and payoff card for us. Rather than solely focusing on playing spells from exile, we can also take advantage of flickering permanents to get Zuko to trigger. While not as effective, since whatever's flickered will lose all the +1/+1 counters we've given it, it is still both a great way to re-trigger Zuko and any enter the battlefield effects that permanent has, making it a solid backup plan. Cloudshift and Ephemerate are 2 of the quintessential flicker cards, both exiling and immediately returning a creature we control. Norin the Wary is one of those cards that'll synergize extremely well with Zuko, since he's pretty much guaranteed to be exiled and returned on each person's turn, every turn, making him a solid choice to get 4 +1/+1 counters on all your creatures pretty much every turn cycle. To flicker our creatures in mass, we have Eerie Interlude and Another Round, 2 cards that do basically the same thing, though the interlude doesn't return them until the next end step. Still, it's an effective way to have a bunch of creatures come in at once to trigger Zuko multiple times. Another Round takes us a step further by letting you repeat the process as many times as you can pay for it. While this does kind of negate Zuko's +1/+1 counters for those creatures, it's still a great way to either build Zuko up to massive proportions, or to re-trigger any other enters from exile effects we may have. The most important part of both of these cards, however, is that you can choose which creatures are flickered, rather than simply all of them. This lets you be really strategic on which creatures you leave back to really rack up the +1/+1 counters, and prevents you from flickering out your tokens, which would simply cease to exist if you did so. While we do have some token generators that trigger whenever we play something from exile, we'll want a few more to make sure we have enough creatures to really maximize on Zuko's ability. Assemble the Legion is a great one that we have access to, giving us more and more tokens the longer it stays out on the battlefield. Krenko, Tin Street Kingpin, and Anam Pakal Thousandth Moon both work similarly. On attack, they both give either 1/1 goblins or 1/1 gnomes, respectively, based on their power. These both work very well with Zuko, given the fact that he'll be giving them +1/+1 counters pretty consistently, really increasing the number of tokens they'll generate pretty much exponentially every turn. I wanted to highlight some specific removal options we have access to that work well with the overall theme of the deck. Avatar's Wrath is a new card that airbends all creatures but one. This means that any creatures we have that were exiled can be recast for 2 mana, triggering Zuko's ability and reducing the impact the board wipe will have on us. It even makes it so that your opponents can't also recast their creatures for at least another turn, giving you a head start in rebuilding your army. Abstruse Appropriation and Hurl Through Hell both work similarly. They both exile a permanent, anything non-land in the Appropriations case, or specifically a creature in the Hurl's case, and then lets you cast them yourselves. This is not only a great way to get rid of one of your opponent's best things, but also lets you then take it for your own, turning what was originally their benefit into yours. Finally, we have some utility cards that work well with our deck's themes. Lelia the Blade Reforged is another one of those cards that acts as both an engine and a payoff, letting you impulse draw when she attacks, and giving her a +1/+1 counter whenever a card is exiled from your library or graveyard. Commanda Liara Portier is going to be an amazing cost reduction effect for us, since she can reduce spells cast from exile by 3 generic mana if all opponents are attacked. She even then impulse draws as well, really making her one of the better cards for our overall strategy. Charred Foyer makes for a nice reoccurring impulse draw source, but really shines when Warped Space is unlocked, as this makes the first spell cast from exile each turn free. Again, it's also not just our turn, but each turn, meaning any instance we have in exile can be cast for free, pairing extremely well with our impulse draw and theft cards. Here's an example deck list utilizing all the previously mentioned cards. Additional cards include another token generation source in Secure the Wastes, more useful utility removal in You Find Some Prisoners and Ruinous Ultimatum, and a plethora of utility lands that help enable our strategy in the Hidden cycle that lets you discover and the Hideaway Forest cycle of cards. Fire Lord Zuko is a super fun commander to build around. When I sat down to make this deck, I was really torn. What's the best route to go? Do we go all in with Flicker, abusing Enter the Battlefield effects over and over? Do we go straight up I'm playing your deck now and just jam it full of all the cards that let us cast our opponent's stuff? Do we focus primarily on Cascade, Discover? Honestly, there's so many routes to go, it was actually a bit overwhelming to really hone in on what to do. I think that coming up with the right combination of all these strategies is really the right way to go. Maybe a bit less on the Flicker side, since we don't really get as much impact with Zuko putting counters on things, but rounding out the rest of these strategies seems like a perfect way to do it. The one downside to this type of strategy is that it'll likely require fine-tuning to make sure each type of card is appropriately included to make sure it synergizes well together. In my playtesting of this deck, there haven't been too many times where I felt like I was really lacking something that I needed to succeed. Honestly, all of what I'm saying here is why I like Zuko so much. His ability really makes you think about the build and how to appropriately maximize it with various different strategies. If you can find that right combination, Zuko will be an absolute monster on the battlefield, and something that will need to be taken care of quickly or spiral out of control. I think we've achieved that, for the most part at least, with this deck, so give it a try. I'd love to see how games go for you and any modifications you make to the deck list. I hope you enjoyed watching this deck tech on Fire Lord Zuko. The full deck list outlined in this video can be found at the Archedeck link at the top of the description. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to drop a like and comment, as well as subscribe to the channel for more Magic content. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.